attackers at this particular very delicate and dangerous moment. How could this be affected? They had no direct contact, of course, with Great Britain, but Beck had known Pius XII when he was Apostolic Nuncio. And so he got the idea to send somebody, a certain Dr. Joseph Müller, who later became Minister of State after the war in Bavaria, to Rome. He was incorporated into the German counterspionage. He went to Rome and through an intermediary put this proposal to Pius XII. Now this was a highly dangerous thing to do. Pius XII, however, said, well, I must do everything I can, because if the war continues, it may cost millions of human lives, and this will also be an opportunity to stop this madman and his killing of innocent people all over, Jews and others. So he decided to go ahead with it. He approached the British ambassador, who was living in the Vatican at the time, and the ambassador transmitted it. All the documents are in the British archives in Kew. I've seen them there myself. So this is not something that was made up. No, all the documents are not in the Vatican. You won't find a scrap of paper in the Vatican archives about it, because it was too dangerous. If ever there would be an invasion by the fascists or Nazis would have found it, well, it would have been a terrible kind of thing for the Catholic Church. But the whole correspondence, going backwards and forward, is in the British archives, in Kew, the central archives of Great Britain, and there it is stated very clearly. Now the thing went up and forward. The German generals continued to put pressure on the Pope. The English were hesitant, and they said, well, who are these generals? But the Pope said, I can't give you the name, because giving out names like that could have meant that somebody by indiscretion or spies would have found out, and these people would be shot on the spot. So he said, I can't mention the name, but I guarantee you that the persons who are heading this group are honest, very serious people. However, the thing went, and then finally the generals did not succeed in upsetting Hitler, so the whole thing fell flat. But a fact remains that in a critical situation like this, the Pope had the courage to take something that might have caused absolute disastrous damage to the Catholic Church if Hitler ever had come to know about this endeavor. Thanks be to God, the people kept their mouth shut. The English had promised to keep this, and they kept their promise. And of course, the Pope was the last person to be interested in divulge this. Hardly anybody in his immediate surroundings knew about it, not even the Secretary of State.
I'd like to go to a different subject now. Because of, I think we know that during the war here in Rome, there were maybe up to 9,000 Jews, maybe between 6,000 to 9,000 Jews at the time of the Nazi occupation. Could you please tell us, based on your personal knowledge, exactly what happened on October 15th and 16th, 1943, when the Nazis began arresting the Roman Jews, and how the Church, or how the Pope reacted to this?
Right. First of all, you are mentioning rightly that this happened in the night between the 15th and 16th October 1943. Of course, it must be pointed out that at this period, Rome and northern Italy, part of central Italy, are occupied by the Germans. Mussolini has been deposed, and the Germans have invaded Italy and occupied Italy and also Rome. Now, in Rome, there are, as you said, several thousand of Jews. It is very difficult to determine the exact date, at least between 6,000 and 7,000 permanent residents. But many Jews from other parts of Italy had flocked to Rome, and also people from abroad, because they felt Rome was a safe place, safer than any places else in Italy or somewhere. Secondly, many people came to Rome because they knew that the Pope was doing every possible effort to facilitate their immigration in neutral countries, especially in the United States, if at all possible, through France, through Portugal, etc. So there were more than the usual residents, Jewish residents here in Rome. The exact number is very difficult to ascertain, because the people who illegally came to Rome from other countries or from non, didn't of course announce it to the police. They were very careful not to announce their presence, so that's obvious. Having stated this, what really happened? Well, Himmler, the person who was most violently opposed to the Jews, had sent down a detachment of 365 SS-men led by a certain Captain Dannecker. That's the name of the man who was supposed to to arrest all the Jews living in Rome. Of course, with 365 people, I mean, it was very little. So he made an appeal to the commander, general commander here in Italy, in the South Front, as they were called, Field Marshal Kesselring, who refused point blank to give even one single soldier. Adducing the fact that his troops were still fighting very much south to Rome against American and Allied, etc., and English. So he said no. The military commander of Rome went further. He told his staff, I won't have anything to do with this swinish business. This military commander was an Austrian, an officer of the old school, a Christian, not a Roman Catholic, but a so-called ancient Roman Catholic. The people had broken away, a schismatic sect who broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1870, but a very honest person. This, as far as the background is concerned. Previously to the 15th of October, the SS in Rome had taken another step. They called the heads of the Jewish community. They knew who they were. They had both been fascists, therefore they felt safe. They called them and said, within a very set period, a very short period, if you do not produce 50 kilograms of gold, 200 Jews will be deported to Germany. Now, the Jews did their best to bring, in a very short period, they succeeded in getting 35 kilograms, but not 50. At that moment, the chief rabbi of Rome, Isaac Zolli, goes to the Vatican. He meets with one of the heads of the financial department of the Vatican, a certain Dr. Nogara, explains the situation, said, can you possibly loan us 15 kilograms of gold? He said, well, I can't give you a permission like that. But he is going directly to the Pope, and the Pope said, of course, if necessary, we will melt down gold chalices. Ask whether they will perhaps accept payment in dollars, an equivalent. However, we will do what we can as on a loan basis, no period fixed for repayment, no interest, absolutely nothing. The intention was really he didn't want to humiliate because Zolli had said, of course, we're going to repay it. So as not to humiliate, they said, to say, we will give it to you. He said, no, okay, we accept it, but under these favorable conditions. However, it turned out that the help of the Vatican was not necessary. According to what is said, it has never been definitively proved, but according to what is said, these 15 kilograms of gold were brought up by Roman Catholics here in Rome. There is no definitive proof of that, but where did the gold come from? Not from the Jews, because they had given whatever they had. However, this is incidental. When this had happened, Isaac Zolli, the chief rabbi, told the lay people in charge of the Jewish community, two people by the name of Foix and Anselmi, he told them, look, let's close down the temple. Let's remove all the names, because they had a full list of all the people, Jewish people living in Rome. Let's, for heaven's sake, remove that. Let's give a period of vacancy, of holiday, pay them in front of all the employees we have, but for heaven's sake. Now, they laughed at him and said, you are an alarmist, nothing is going to happen to us. We have lived here in Italy for so long, there's no problem. So they didn't do anything. So when, shortly on, falling short to the promise to let leave the Jews in peace when they had paid the gold, breaking that promise, they invaded the temple, took hold of everything, of the money, of all the names and addresses, etc., so they knew exactly where to go. And of course, there was a lot of noise when this happened. About 1,000 people were arrested, not all of them, because the detachment of 365 just was not sufficient. This caused a lot of noise, and a lady was looking out of a window and saw what was going to happen, that these people were carted off in lorries, and gave a ring to a friend, her friend, the Princess Pignatelli Cortes Aragon, a person with whom I had years ago several long interviews and talks, because I wanted to find out directly from her what had happened. She gave a telephone ring to, just in a sense very, very curious, to a member of the German embassy, a certain Wollenweber. And he, with his diplomatic German card, took her right into the Vatican. She was a very courageous woman, a tiny little person, but a courageous woman. She knew where the Pope was celebrating Mass and his private apartment. She penetrated there, spoke to the Pope, and the Pope, in her presence, called the Secretary of State, ordering him to call immediately the German ambassador to Holy See to make a very strong protest against it. In fact, the meeting took place. The German ambassador, Ernst von Weizsäcker, immediately went to see Cardinal Maglione, the Secretary of State, and the Cardinal made it perfectly clear that the Pope was outraged by this, that in his own diocese, practically under his windows, as it was later said, these things happen. Weizsäcker said, for heaven's sake, don't make a public protest. You know what Hitler is like, and leave it to me. I'm going to take care of the matter. And they left it at that. But the Pope didn't trust that. In fact, Weizsäcker didn't do a thing, nothing, till the next day when everything was over. In the meantime, however, a combined effort was made by an Austrian bishop, an otherwise rather disputable person, and a German diplomat who was hostile to Hitler. They prepared a letter, and the letter had no effect whatsoever, incidentally arrived far too late. But now another question comes in. One of the most confidential collaborators of the Pope, who did a lot to help Jews and other persecuted people, he was a Bavarian. And he knew this German commander, this Brigadier General Stahl. He went to him and insisted that the Pope wanted to do something, get something be done, something efficient to stop it once and for all. Stahl listened, sent his aide-de-camp to the ambassador, requesting that he should take immediate action. The ambassador said, I can't do nothing.
What was the name of the
ambassador?
No, the Austrian close collaborator with the Pope.
It's Father Pankratius Pfeiffer, the general of the Salvatorians, which are living close by. The Salvatorians have their general just opposite our house here. Mm-hmm. So when this appeal of Stahl, which he made on the request of Pius XII, had no success with the German ambassador, he took the matter in his own hand. Now, what I'm going to tell you now is not very publicly known, but it may be useful that you know it. I got in touch with General Dietrich Belitz, who was the liaison officer between the headquarters of Field Marshal Kesselring and the headquarters of Hitler himself. As a liaison officer, he listened into every single communication that went on between these two headquarters, and of course he knew Stahl. After some difficult negotiations through immediate persons, I got in touch with Belitz, and we had several long telephone conversations. He said, well, General, you must know exactly what Stahl did do. I know that he telephoned to Himmler, but I don't know anything what he said. Do you know about that? He said, I do. And I said, he never gave interview to journalists, he didn't want anything like that, but he gave me leave to use it for the process of Pius XII. And I printed it. Now, he told me the following. Stahl took it about himself to telephone directly to Heinrich Himmler, the chief of the SS, and threatened him. Of course, humanitarian reasons with a man like that would have been absolutely useless. He used military reasons. He said, Herr Himmler, if you continue to do what you are doing now, you are making it impossible for me to provide our troops that are still fighting far to the south of Rome with all the material they need. That is one of my chief tasks here. If you continue, I am afraid there will be an uprising in Rome. There will be an uprising in the south of Rome. It will not be possible for me to provide our fighting troops. We can write them off right away. If you want to do it, go right ahead. I won't. So he threatened him like that. He said, look, over there, the Allied have absolute dominion in the air. They are strafing our trains, they are strafing our lorries, etc. So that's very difficult. During the night, we have to do with the partisans. So this difficulty is already now very critical. You continue and it is hopeless. Now Hitler, who was not a military man, listening to a highly decorated general, was so impressed by it that immediately he ordered to stop the deportation of the Jews. This telephone conversation took place about noon, about 12 o'clock on the 16th, and 2 hours later, at 2 p.m., Hitler gave the order to stop everything immediately and recall the person. Unfortunately, nothing could be done for the 1,000 people who had been arrested and were here in the Collegio Romano. The Pope sent a member of the Secretary of State to see what could be done about them, but the man wasn't even admitted. They didn't enter into them at all. So nothing could be done. That is the true situation. Here again you see that the intervention of the Pope was instrumental and providential to save it. He regretted very much that he could do nothing for these 1,000 people who were miserably, brutally, criminally killed in Auschwitz.
What is the common theory of the Roman Jewish community here now, today? What's the reason that the arrest was stopped? Do they attribute this to another?
Well, the details that I told you now, are not commonly known. But they should have known that the Pope gave order to open all the 155 ecclesiastical houses here in Rome. This is well known, they know it. And the fact that they know it, for example, in 1946, there was the first General Assembly of all the Jewish communities here in Italy. And in Via Tasso, the famous prison and headquarters of the SS and Gestapo here in Rome, they put up a huge marmor slab in which, in a very moving way, they thanked Pius XII for all that he had done for the Jews in Rome during this terrible period. Unfortunately, this slab is no longer there, but I had it photographed.
You have a photograph of it?
Yes, I can give it to you. I have to look it up. It was published in certain publications. It's not unrarely published. Recently, it has disappeared. I made an inquiry. I said, what's happening? And they said, well, we had to restructure the whole thing, and the slab broke, etc. Maybe or may not be. Because the attitude of many Jewish people, you must take into account they are not the people who have lived under those conditions. They have fallen a victim to mystifications, and they seem to have forgotten or do not dare to speak out about it. That is the question. We have tried with certain people years ago, when there's still people alive who had been sheltered in Roman houses. At times they were put into priestly cassocks in case there would be an invasion, they would be mistaken to be priests. The women were clad as nuns. They were taught to say Our Father and Hail Mary, the Catholic typical prayers. If there was